Welcome to the Scrum.org Community Podcast, a podcast from the home of Scrum. In this podcast, we feature professional Scrum trainers and other Scrum practitioners sharing their stories and experiences to help learn from the experience of others. This episode is a previous recording of our live Ask a Professional Scrum Trainer series, where a live audience asks questions of professional Scrum trainers. We hope you enjoy this episode. Welcome, everyone, to the Scrum.org Community Podcast. I'm Lindsay Velecina, and I am stepping in as host today for a special Ask a Professional Scrum Trainer session. This episode is not live like these episodes traditionally are, but I have PST Joanna Plaskonka here from Poland, here to answer some leftover questions from her recent webinar on the importance of psychological safety in Scrum Teams. And welcome to the podcast, Joanna.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lindsay, for having me. I'm super excited that we have this opportunity to address any remaining questions.
I'm excited too. Before we dive into these questions, Joanna, do you want to just give the audience a little intro to yourself and tell us a little bit about you before we get started?
Of course, I'm happy to do that. So you already know my name. My name is Joanna Plaskonka. I'm Polish. I live in Poland. I tend to call myself a problem whisperer. So the person that will help you solve a variety of your problems. And I wear different hats. I combine different techniques to make it possible for my customers, for the teams, individuals. So today I'm mostly wearing my PST hat, so professional Scrum Trainer hat, but I'm also a certified Agile Kata trainer, a certified action learning coach, a certified practitioner when it comes to psychological safety. So I love having this huge portfolio to always pick the best solutions for the people who work with me.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I love that problem whisperer. So let's dive in here and solve some problems.
Yes, let's do that.
All right. So let's go through these questions. I've grouped these leftover questions in some different categories. So we're going to start with diving into measuring and assessing psychological safety. So how do we measure psychological safety, Joanna?
That's a fantastic question. And thanks to Professor Amy Edmondson, we have a certain model that is showing us psychological safety has different aspects, and we may have high results in one aspect, but low in a totally different. So if you are interested, there is an idea described in the book and in the papers created by Professor Amy Edmondson. So that will be my strong recommendation for you. It's a great idea because it can give you quite quick and easy tool to see those different aspects in numbers, right? So you will be able to see how does it look for your team. The other option, more professional and more advanced, is to ask a certified practitioner in psychological safety because we have a professional survey and we can help you go deeper into that, assess results, and help you with focused efforts on improving those aspects.
That's great. Thank you. So there's a follow-up question here too. So are there any surveys to determine the performance zone in a team?
That's another amazing question. So if you participated in the webinar, you know that performance zone, it's an intersection of work that is challenging, right? It's not easy, and high psychological safety. So as a result, we are looking here for two areas, two aspects to measure. So if I were you, I would, in the service, I would focus on two aspects. First one, are our goals challenging, interesting, but not overwhelming, right?
Right.
And the other aspect will be assess the level of psychological safety. If you have quite high level of psychological safety and your challenges, the goals are exciting for the team, right? They bring this positive energy and don't make them feel overwhelmed.
That makes
Most
sense.
likely you are in this zone.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. So, what tools and metrics can you use to show a team has psychological safety apart from observation?
So observation, by the way, can bring some valuable insights. However, I think that we already mentioned methods, model from Professor Amy Edmondson can bring you specific measurements. And I'm a big fan of behavioral questions. So if you have any knowledge when it comes to UX research, great UX researchers ask questions, for instance, how many times in the last month you did something, right? Or your team did something. So you can build a set of this kind of questions that will be connected to psychological safety. More specific example to give you an inspiration. So how many times in the last month or in the last sprint you challenged, presented idea in an open but still kind way?
I love that. Thanks. Okay, so this next one here. Assessing psychological safety can be tricky if it's not present in the first place. If surveys allow for anonymous inputs, they can provide insights, but real value comes from open sharing. Should a trusted spokesperson be elected to conduct one-on-one interviews?
I wouldn't say should, because there is no obligation to do that. In
Right.
some of the companies, just anonymous service, real anonymous service, right? Not we say it's anonymous and later we, assess people based on their answers. They can do a lot of work. And this is how we typically conduct assessment of psychological safety. But you can do that. Definitely, I think you can do that. So it's great if you can ask somebody in the organization that can do it. So everyone trusts that person and he or she can conduct some deeper interviews. It's also a great place to mention why in some of the cases it's great to ask for external consultant, because that person is unbiased and she does not have any story with you, with your team, can also help you do that. I strongly believe that's my personal way of working, but I also strongly believe that my colleagues here work in the same way. So we set clear boundaries, and if we say, okay, we will help you with that, but we will maintain safe space for those conversations, this is what we will do as consultants.
Okay, that makes sense. All right, so I like this next question because sometimes I can be a naturally quiet person because I'm pretty introverted. So, how do you determine when someone is naturally quiet versus not feeling safe to share?
Mm-hmm. That's a really good question. And actually, that's one of the myths. Like psychological safety is related to someone's character or preferences. It's not. So,
Right.
generally speaking, I would love to remind us that we have different facilitation techniques. And as professionals, we should learn to pick technique that allows everyone to share their voice, right? We have different ideas coming from liberating structures. We have the whole course and free materials at Scrum.org about facilitation.
Right.
So if you want to assess whether there is a problem with psychological safety or it's just how a given person behaves, well, you can measure level of psychological safety in your team, because this group measurement always gives you some insights, right? And you will spot some of the important signals there. That's one side. Second point is that if the person is quiet despite all the techniques that you use, and is very quiet even in one-to-one conversations, right? Maybe it's a problem with trust, maybe it's a problem with psychological safety. I would also love to emphasize that we are humans. And when going to work, we still bring our luggage, our stories. Maybe this person is currently battling with some problems that are personal ones. So I would
Right.
also love to remind you that we humans by default are complex creatures, and it's good to think broadly about each person.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you. All right. So moving right along here. So we're going to kind of shift gears a little bit. So the next group of questions here are focused on psychological safety and leadership. And we actually are going to have a webinar on this topic coming up May 20th. So we look forward to that with you, Joanna. So this first question here, so what do you do if the leadership in your organization does not act consistently in a way that promotes psychological safety but does not realize it? It
I
sounds
love
dangerous.
yeah. I love that question. And I always love to emphasize that. And I also teach leaders when we have leadership courses that the problem with being the leader, that your perspective is changing. And sometimes leaders simply do not know, right? And it's not because they don't want to know, but nobody told them directly. And obviously, they are not with us every single day. They are not attending a lot of our meetings, right? So, my experience is that in some of the organizations, creating conditions where leaders can get some improvement ideas, right? I
Right.
even wouldn't call it like positive or negative feedback. I would even just say, that's one of the technique that I used. Idea box for the leader, right? Maybe this is something
That's a good
that can,
idea.
yeah, give them some food for thought. Another idea, I always say that it's tough to be a professional. Sometimes it's even tougher to be a leader. Leaders need support. Leaders need mentors. Leaders need those kind of, how to say that, intelligent rubber ducks, right? So I think that when they have an advisor, supporter, someone who can present different perspective on the things, can help them a lot. And in many cases, it's really tough to, if you are working in that company, right, inside, to tell your leader directly,
Right.
because
That
when
is
we say,
tricky.
yeah, low psychological safety, it means by default you struggle, right? So that's why I would look for safer places or safer ideas like this box. Or generally speaking, HR experts can help. Maybe leaders will be open for some advisors that can start those conversations, and the leaders can learn to leverage psychological safety as something that will help them create high-performing teams.
Yeah, those are good ideas there. And this next question is very different from that one. So this person's situation is a bit different. So recently we've had a larger cultural change that devalues psychological safety. How should we work with leadership to turn this around?
I love that question. And I will start actually with the question why we should turn this around, right? Because in the end of the day, it's not about psychological safety, right? So research from Professor Amy Edmondson, and the same was actually confirmed by Google. It's not about having psychological safety. It's because psychological safety enables great things, right? And
Yes.
one of the most important things from leaders' perspective, we will talk deeper about that in the upcoming webinar, is performance. So trust me, I have never in my whole life met a manager or leader who reacts to how to improve performance. I don't care. Stupid topic, right? Silly things. So this is something that will bring their attention. So instead of emphasizing psychological safety, let's talk about performance.
Yeah.
If you are able to change this conversation into how to be more effective in delivering value, then maybe it will be this start for this conversation, and psychological safety pops up naturally as a tool that will help you make it happen.
Those are good ideas on other ways to get their attention. I like that. So this next one. So how do we deal with micromanagement from senior managers?
Very good question. General one, to some extent connected with psychological safety too. My,
Right.
my, my piece of advice here is as follows. In really vast majority of cases, micromanagement is not because they are mean or they have bad intentions. It's actually the opposite. So if you observe micromanagement, it might be they don't know they can work differently, and there might be better ways of handling things. Second point, maybe there are some problems. You already have certain history, right? And they don't have evidence that they can trust people will do certain things. So I would actually reframe that to what was the reason of this micromanagement, how
Right.
we can address underlying problems and reasons. And if you are looking for something more specific, well, we could talk about it for hours, but one small piece of advice is as follows. Try to identify one of the problems that those managers are thinking about. If you are able to help them with solving that problem, this small success can change everything.
Right. Cool. Thank you. And like another thing to think about with that question as a general question is just how much transparency is there between the developers and senior management too? Because if there isn't much transparency as to what's going on, maybe that's where the micromanagement could be stemming from as well.
You're right. You're absolutely right.
All right. So this next one here, ugh, sounds rough. So if you work in an organization where there is a culture of punishment as a management technique, how do you incorporate psychological safety into the teams you lead?
Okay. Good news is as follows. And we also mentioned that briefly during our past webinar. Psychological safety, as recognized and defined by Professor Amy Edmondson, is on the team level. What does it mean? If the manager of the team and the team, this particular team, can introduce changes affecting the level of psychological safety, then better things, some good things will be happening inside that team. So a lot of things depend, in my view, on the manager, on the leader. They have, I would say, this Spider-Man superpower, right? So with great power comes enormous responsibility.
Right.
So it's a matter of what happens between you and your manager. If your manager wants to do things differently, then you can start building your team culture, your team psychological safety. And who knows, because if you achieve performance zone, maybe you will actually bring evidence for others and you will inspire others. How cool is that?
Yes, that's very cool. That's a really, really good idea there. So I hope that helps. So how do you handle quote unquote red in the DISC system? I'm not familiar with that. Managers who seldom inspire psychological safety.
I love that question because I perceive myself as a leader and I'm red in disc.
Okay.
So actually, I think, how do you encourage Joanna, right? So here I would love to emphasize that no matter what are our results in those kind of tests, psychological tests or some behavioral tests that show that we prefer certain things or we have certain preferences. So if you are not familiar with that, I'm not disc expert, but I can tell you that typically red color is associated with managers, leaders, because it's a person focused a lot on results, person focused on acting, a person that wants to see results, right? Person who wants to see decision making, right? That's not my personal preference, right? I don't like very long discussions leading us to maybe, right? I would love to see actions. Now, at the same time, I'm psychological safety expert, right? So what I believe is that you can take all the best from this preference, from this red color, right? And combine it with skills and knowledge that can help you become a great leader. Because being red actually brings a lot of valuable things, right? When combined with knowledge from product discovery and validation, red manager will be pushing us, let's conduct this experiment as quick as possible. So maybe it's just a matter of equipping that person, maybe through training, maybe through mentorship, maybe through leading by example. If there are other people in the company that possess this knowledge and understanding of the importance of psychological safety. And actually, I strongly believe you can be a very good leader if you are red in this model.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you. All right, so we're gonna shift categories again. So we've already covered measurement and diving into leadership. Now we're gonna go back to the team. So psychological safety within the teams. So how can I encourage psychological safety as my team's product owner when my team continuously chooses to ignore my risk mitigation suggestions and then suffers the consequences?
That's a really good question. And it actually triggers a lot of questions in my head, right? Because I would ask first with asking why those things are happening, right? Because maybe it is about psychological safety, at least to some extent, but maybe it's a matter of different things and different aspects that we have to include that, right? Because ignoring suggestions from product owner might have many different reasons, right? And let me show you an example that is connected with psychological safety.
Okay.
So imagine a very experienced product owner. She knows a lot, about product discovery, right? So she knows a lot about prototyping. She joins a new team. Their knowledge is super small. And she assumes that they know, right? Because for her it's like, daily meal. And what if, because of lack of psychological safety, they are not open to tell her, you know what, we have no idea what you are speaking about when this risk mitigation strategies. When you speak about those techniques of prototyping, right? What if they simply don't understand what's happening? So, Lindsay, you mentioned beautifully topic of transparency. Maybe we lack transparency here.
Maybe.
So maybe we should talk. We should understand the reasons. In my experience, it might be more complex, and psychological safety might affect this situation in the sense that maybe we are not courageous to admit certain things. Like, for instance, we don't understand you, or we don't know what you are speaking about.
Right. Yeah, that's a lot to think about. So how do I motivate people to ask more questions besides asking questions myself?
Very good question. About questions. I love questions about questions. There are a few things here. Maybe I will reframe this question a little bit, because how do I motivate? Well, we know from the book Drive what truly motivates us: autonomy, mastery, purpose, right?
Right.
Bring that to your work, right? Show them the purpose, show them the meaning, let them pick the questions. But, and this is my strong experience from one of my hats, from wearing one of my hats. So I've learned in the last few years that we are not used to asking questions. A lot of meetings consist of statement versus statement, adding statement, building on the top of statement. And
Right.
the technique that absolutely changed everything for me is called action learning. And in that way of working, there is always a coach if you conduct fully working action learning session. And this coach is actively teaching the group how to use questions. So this is a pretty intense experience for a lot of people. And at the same time, each action learning session is focused on a certain problem that we need to discuss. So I believe this makes this approach easier to sell. I don't like this vocabulary, but let's be honest. We have to, in many cases, convince people, because you can take one of the complex problems that you are currently facing, and instead of conducting a meeting with just sharing opinions, you can use action learning to change it completely, and action learning coach will help you maximize this experience of practicing asking questions.
That's great advice. Thank you. All right. So here's another one. So a team member frequently interrupts or dismisses others' ideas during daily scrums, causing some team members to stop contributing. What steps can the Scrum Master take to address this behavior?
Oh, I love that question. And I would ask myself more questions if I were a Scrum Master in that scenario. The first
Right.
one would be, is this person aware of what's happening, right? Because maybe it's just a matter of, one of my favorite techniques is to let's invite this person for ice cream, meal, coffee, let's have a normal, kind conversation, and let's bring this perspective, right? So maybe, and in my experience, this is reality, right? We don't have, at least in Poland, at school, subjects like how to communicate effectively, how to share different perspectives in a kind and supportive manner, right? So I had math, chemistry, biology, right? We were not taught, right? If
Okay.
we were not lucky to go through certain paths or had great mentors, we may not know or we may not realize. So my first action would be just to share my thoughts, my observations, and my feelings with that person to show him or her different perspective. And when I had similar situations, typically the person was a bit shocked, but also curious, right? Can you help me spot that? So sometimes it's actually a start of building some kind of growth relationship. And I offer some safe feedback. So not during this meeting, like I will point out with my finger, that may not bring a lot of value, but instead, like I help people better prepare for meeting. I share my feedback after the meeting, my observations, and it helps them change their behaviors.
That's great advice. But what happens when that person is not receptive when you point it out to them and
Well,
are offended and on the defensive and not receptive to that advice. How do
Yeah,
you
of
handle
course.
that?
Of course it can happen. So you can also ask for external help, especially if you are not working in a very small company. In HR, there are great experts trained in conflict management, right? Because I can imagine that a lot of people would say, but I'm a Scrum Master, I'm responsible for helping with the conflicts. But maybe now you are a part of the conflict, right? Ask a colleague, maybe another Scrum Master or a person trained in that to help you facilitate that. Maybe this person who used to interrupt and who used to present those behaviors during the meeting, maybe he or she needs more time, needs to hear some of the things from others presenting this
Good
different
idea.
perspective, right? Worst case scenario, please remember you can ask people like leaders and others to help you solve that, right? You are not responsible for everything.
Right. All right. Thank you. Just wanted to do a little bit of devil's advocate there. So,
That's good.
next question here. So, teams often adopt unstated rules about what is acceptable to challenge. How do implicit cultural norms affect psychological safety, and how can we make these invisible rules explicit? The big question.
A big question, right? So a lot of questions. So let me go back to the definition of psychological safety and emphasize. We say team psychological safety, right? So whether it's implicit or explicit, according to Professor Amy Edmondson, it is what happens inside of the team, right? So it's like this air that we breathe in. When you want to make something implicit explicit, make it like that. So it's about bringing transparency. What about writing it down? I love those kind of, how to say that, workshops, activities with the teams. And I think it's very powerful when you just say, what if during this sprint retrospective, we will write down the most important roles for us, or what is the most important for us when working within the team, right? In my experience, it can bring those roles to this conversation. And when writing down, it's generally a great idea because then words will be in front of everyone and we can start discussing. But you said, good example. But I thought that we think feedback is a gift and I can say thank you and choose whether I act on it or not. And you say embrace the feedback should be our team rule. And I see it differently because embrace feedback is pushing a little bit of pressure on me, right? I should always act on that feedback, right? So maybe just do an activity, especially writing down things and spotting out the differences in vocabulary, even related to the same things, can help you make it visible, understood in the same way. And if there are some differences, you can spot them.
Yeah, those are some good ideas to put it down visually like that, to make that comparison. That makes a lot of sense. So this is a working with product owners question. So how do you work with product owners that constantly say we don't have time to try anything and focus only on efficiency?
Yes. So yes, was also my experience, but let me make it clear. Are we speaking about efficiency or effectiveness? So my understanding is that efficiency is that we have to do a lot of stuff, right? And we have to, in many of the situations, we have to keep people busy with the work, right? Because we are paying, companies paying for their salaries. While effectiveness, in my vocabulary, means we are focused on delivering value. And generally speaking, in my view, being obsessive about delivering value, how we can do it better, is great, right? It's absolutely great. The problem with efficiency, too much focus on efficiency, is that it can lead to so-called feature factory or the cult of busyness, let's put it that way, right? So that will be my first piece of advice. Please observe, is it about efficiency or is it about effectiveness? If it is about effectiveness, actually it's good news because we know that thanks to high psychological safety, we will become more effective in delivering value. So yes, we will find time for that if our product owner is interested in improving effectiveness.
That makes a lot of sense. All right, so this question, how would you recommend addressing the deeper fear that admitting a mistake may lower one's perceived competence?
That's an amazing question. And I think we will definitely go deeper into our next webinar. Short answer is, one of the strongest techniques that I observed is leaders admitting to their mistakes and telling it's okay, right? That we make mistakes. I'm also doing mistakes, right? Here is my latest mistake. So I know that there are some techniques. We mentioned celebration of intelligent errors, right? Great technique, wonderful technique, practiced by big companies focused on innovation to just make people feel it's fine. But in my experience, this technique is powerful. The strongest signal that can be sent, in my view, is the leader openly admitting regularly what kind of mistakes they did. And sometimes it's just a matter of, I'm sorry, I was wrong, this is my mistake, blah, blah, blah. That can make tremendous impact.
Right, it can. That makes a lot of sense. All right. So one more here on the team front, and then we will dive into another topic. So what do you do if you do not feel psychological safety in the organization, but are trying to create it for your team?
Another amazing question. Again, according to Professor Amy Edmondson, we are speaking on this topic of psychological safety on the team level. So it means that it's absolutely normal that you are not feeling safe normally to speak, I made a mistake in the front of 5,000 people. With some of them you have very little relationship. Some of them are almost strangers, right? Because they work in totally different areas. So it's fine, right? Because what makes high-performing team? High team psychological safety can support that. So even if you are not feeling safe to do it on organizational level, it does not stop you from focusing on your team and building psychological safety inside of your team.
Great. All right. So we covered the team. We're going to shift gears a little bit. I'm going to jump around to scaling psychological safety in organizations. So how do you create a psychological or psychologically safe environment at the organization level?
I was waiting for that question. It's a perfect moment for that question. Lindsay, you have picked the questions in the right order. So I will just build on the top of my previous answer. Because it is on the team level, created on each team level, one team at a time. So don't expect, doing like that and some magic will happen, right? If you want to build, Professor Amy Edmondson calls it the fearless organization. then each team needs to build high psychological safety, right? So this is how you scale up.
Makes sense. All right. Cool. So some practical strategy and retrospective and some other things type of questions. Kind of a hodgepodge here. But what do you think about using powerful questions in sprint retrospectives?
Absolutely love them. I
How does that
absolutely
help
love them.
foster psychological safety?
I think that sometimes people are afraid to ask this powerful question.
Mm-hmm.
And when the first person asks it out loud, it can actually open the door to building psychological safety. So this is how I see that. And please remember, you can learn more about it when you read about action learning or practice action learning. The way how you ask a question can also build psychological safety. How to do that? Show with your question that you are interested, you are curious, you are open to hear someone's perspective. You are not going to judge anything. It's just like human, pure curiosity, you know? And if you practice asking questions in that way, you are incorporating practices that can
Right.
increase your psychological safety.
Yeah, it's totally right. So, can you advise any retrospective examples to further advance psychological safety within teams? Maybe beyond that one we
Mm-hmm.
just talked about.
Well, you can do a lot of things. Actually, one of the practices that my colleague is advocating for, especially when it comes to errors, uh, each in each sprint retrospective. What about having a short round? Everyone, absolutely everyone, brings an example of an error that they did during last sprint. So that's one of the things. Create a routine out of that. And because if it
It's a good idea.
happens naturally, right, every single sprint, people tend to create a habit in their own head. Okay, I will
Mm-hmm.
make a mistake. What next? Follow-up questions on errors. What have you learned from that error? How will it affect our future work? And then you have this improvement ideas also naturally
Right.
incorporated.
Awesome. That makes total sense. So, this next one here. So, how do I address questioning that is not inquisitive, but rather leads to destructive conclusions and is disguised as curiosity? For example, I just want to understand.
Mm-hmm. I'm not sure, but this is my personal perception. If somebody asks me, I want to understand your perspective, I don't feel like it's affecting me in any negative way. Maybe intonation and the context will also affect, right, my perception. But generally, I think the question is really valid. And I was in such situation. What I did is I used paraphrasing.
Okay.
Why paraphrasing? Because it gives a person some kind of the mirror, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
ask, did you mean that, or what your intention behind that question was? Blah blah blah, right? And in many cases, people simply realize, hey, oh, so this is what she heard. Maybe this is not what I wanted to say,
Right.
but interesting observation, right? So we don't know that we can ask it differently. The other thing is that sometimes I feel like people need to hear this question from another person because this will create reflection in their head. And maybe just using that technique, you help them realize, well, maybe this question was not the best one. Maybe I can do it differently. I also
Mm-hmm.
recall a conversation when a few people in the room were talking, and a part of the meeting was like me saying, I understood from this, that, blah, blah, blah. And after a few of those rounds, people realized that, maybe we can do it differently, right? So I wasn't needed any longer, but to some extent, I was a translator from Polish to Polish, right? So the language was the same, but the way how you use language was completely different.
It's interesting to think about. So these two questions here, they could possibly go hand in hand. So going to ask them sort of together. So could you give me an example of reactions or answers on how you would respond to someone subtly but condescendingly or mockingly reacting to a colleague? Maybe talk about how like the bad influence of unequal statuses maybe could play into this.
So it's another good question. Depending on what is my situation, right? What is my position in that room? Maybe my answers will be different, right? So the context would most likely lead my behaviors. Why it's so important? Because generally speaking, what is one of the biggest challenges when it comes to building psychologically safe environment? And a leader, and when I say leader, I mean both formal but also informal. Somebody may have higher status because they are longer in that team, right?
Right.
That person was hiring me as potential future colleague in this hiring committee, right? So there might be different reasons why somebody has a higher status. And always a person who is a leader or has a higher status because of any reason can affect the level of psychological safety significantly. So generally speaking, my piece of advice is to maybe ask a question with curiosity, because if it's like, let's imagine this idea is stupid, right? Or worst case scenario, you are stupid, then
Oh,
I would say, why do you think so?
yeah,
Right? Why do you think
right,
so? Let me understand that. Or maybe you can rephrase that. A real life example, by the way. Okay, what I hear from you is that you don't like my idea, or you don't like the way how I did it, or any other detail like that. Can you help me understand why? What
right,
was not effective, what was not the best for our context, right? You may be surprised, because if you present high leadership skills in that sense that you change the quality of that conversation, it may actually turn out to be something quite positive, but it
right.
requires a lot of courage and skills. Last but not least, non-violent communication can also inspire you. Please Google for the book, Google for materials in that matter.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. That makes a lot of sense in a tricky situation. So this next one, we have like two more questions we're going to try to get to. We've gone through a lot in this session. Thank you so much to our listeners who submitted these. These are really great. So you're going to have to explain a little bit about the devil's advocate that you talked about in the webinar, but have you tried to use Chat GPT to act as devil's advocate? So if you want to explain a little bit about what you talked about in the webinar with devil's advocate, and then yes, that answered the question if you tried using some sort of AI to act as that.
Yes, of course, I'm happy to do that. So devil's advocate is a situation when somebody is playing that. It means they are always in the opposite to the group. So the purpose of such acting of such person is to keep on challenging team to find some holes, some weak points, find reasons why not to go into that direction, because it can boost creativity. It can also teach us, in the context of psychological safety, it's okay to have totally different perspective. So that's why it's a powerful technique. Now, have I used any large language model for that? Yes. Yes, I used. So definitely, if you create a prompt like, here is my context, and I want you to act like a devil's advocate, yes, it helps. Do I use it all the time in such a way? No, because I believe contact with human beings can bring totally different perspectives. I still love working with people whenever it's possible. And there is also psychological effect. We as humans, we find a lot of value in meaningful connections with others, right? So please remember, ChatGPT or Claude or anything you use should never be a replacement of positive relationships with your colleagues.
No, it should not. All right. So we have one closing question here. We'll have to answer relatively quickly. We're at the end of the hour already. So why is psychological safety still a neglected topic in organizations despite the scientific proof of its importance? Why do you think that? Or
Very
do
good
you think that,
question.
or do you think that it could just been the
Yeah,
listener's perspective? So what do you think?
I absolutely agree with that point. This is consistent with my observation. I believe it's a lack of knowledge and a lot of myths around psychological safety. I strongly believe that if more and more people understand it's about achieving high performance, we can turn the ship around.
That makes sense. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. And this was a lot of questions here. So thank you, Joanna, for taking the time. There'll be more content coming from Joanna on this topic, so stay tuned for that. And like I mentioned, there's also going to be a webinar on May 20th, so focused on leadership with psychological safety. So please be sure to check that out. And thank you so much to our listeners for submitting all these great questions during the last session. I'm glad we could incorporate it into an Ask a PST. So thank you, Joanna, and thank you, everyone. Scrum on.
Thank you. Scrum on.